Denny, we're going to revisit an old topic that we've done an episode on in the past. This is going to be a little bit of a throwback podcast, but the reason why we're bringing it up is because of recent experiences, and that's for depreciation reports. So for those that don't know, Stratas are supposed to have a depreciation report done every 3 years, and that report is basically done by an engineering firm that evaluates a building to basically look at the lifespan and condition of all the components of that building to give the strata an actionable plan and reduce surprises for maintaining their building over the long run. I think the questions and dilemmas, or the concern or the frustrations I have with these reports is, in theory, the intent is good. It gives people a plan. It gives them actionable items. It gives them a qualified professional to look at their building and basically reduce surprises from heavy sporadic assessments so that they can just have better financial planning over a long term. I guess the downside, and maybe before I go into the downside, is, Denny, I'll ask you some questions. Have you ever seen a favorable depreciation report on an older building?
The answer to that question is I've never seen a favorable depreciation report on any building of all time.
Like old or new. Have you ever seen...
Before your second question, I want to preface my sarcasm with, I think depreciation reports are a fantastic tool. And I think they're a fantastic tool because they give you an accurate history of the building's maintenance. So you can look back into these reports and see, okay, the last time the roof was replaced was 12 years ago. The last time, or like the other building maintenance that they've done is here laid out for you because they have kept fairly accurate records, versus 10 years ago when I started, there was no such thing as a depreciation report, and a lot of buildings did not keep very good records. So when you're buying or helping someone buy a 1980s or 1970s condo, you are guessing on a lot of items because they don't have any history or record of, okay, the last time a roof was replaced. And often you'd ask listing agents to, connect with the property manager. Can you ask when the last time they replaced the roof was? Because your seller moved in 4 years ago. They haven't done anything. They knew it was older at that time. And you're just kind of trying to piece together information. And the correspondence with property managers, which is very, very challenging and slow, was a lot more. And we now have these detailed reports to kind of rely on. So I love that they give a very, in most cases, a pretty accurate history of the building's maintenance, but in no way are they religion for maintenance moving forward.
They're not necessarily, they're rarely intended to implement, they're rarely implemented on their intended schedule.
Yeah.
So they put like a lifespan of windows, for example. I don't know about you, Denny, but say a lifespan of windows is 30 years. Have you seen a 30-year-old building change all their windows at 30 years?
Almost no. Almost never. I mean, occasionally it could happen where the strata votes to do an entire building if they were...
built a 90s leaky condo.
If they were malfunctioning or faulty. But in almost every scenario across Greater Vancouver, for windows, for example, a strata will just start assessing them at like the 30, 35-year range. And over time, window seals will crack and they'll get foggy, and their condensation will happen on the inside of the windows. And then the strata will elect to replace the 10 or 12 each year that are having issues. But almost never will an entire strata decide in a condo or in a concrete building, for example, to replace the entirety of the building's windows for $4.7 million.
Yeah, I think the positives, there are 100% positives from a depreciation report. And, the positives that you stated are legit. Like, it gives you a lot of information about the past. I think the frustration and the concern where depreciation reports jeopardize deals is looking at the replacement schedule provided by an engineer.
Yes.
And so just the nature of what are some true factors. Engineers are conservative. Engineers have a safety factor. They want to cover their butts. They're not in the best, their interests are different than yours.
Yeah.
So they're going to basically say the roof is up at a certain time, windows are up at a certain time, regardless of the fact that the windows may not make sense to change. Mm-hmm. Windows are a debatable topic. You could say, these are old windows, they should be changed for the energy efficiency. But the reality is the cost of a new window, you'll never get that money back from the savings you get from saving that little bit of energy. So you're not going to see a return on your investment. And if the window's glass is clear and it's not leaking around the window, it's purely an aesthetic thing that might cost you an extra $1.05 in heat a month. So the experience I had is it's an older condo in New West, and it has a depreciation report that's not very favorable. And this depreciation report basically outlines in the next, between now 2025 and 2030, that it's going to have new siding, new windows, new balconies, and a new garage parkade having to be dressed underneath, and also new water pipes. And the reality is, pipes might come up in the next 5 to 10 years, but they're not going to do the windows. They're not going to do the siding. They're not going to do the balconies, and they're not going to do the garage. And there probably is going to be some maintenance on these items that will need to be done. But the depreciation report, if a buyer took it for what it is, this small condo that's under $400,000 would have $30,000 a year ongoingly going towards capital projects to building improvements. And it financially just wouldn't make sense. The siding's not leaking. It's just older siding. It's at the end of its lifespan on paper, maybe, but if it's not, it's functioning perfectly fine. So I think the knocking down depreciation reports to me is a single family homeowner might do a pre-inspection from a building inspector to get proactive on items that they need to fix, but they're not going to have an engineer come in and say that their siding needs to be redone, their roof needs to be done, all these things need to be completely redone. So why are we doing it for condos? One, like you said, give more information. But if the implementation strategy suggested from that engineering report is scary and not practical and not even close to being implemented, you have Stratas investing in these engineering firms, putting these depreciation reports together that ultimately create a document that reduces the value of their places. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened here. So this Strata decided to get a depreciation report because that's what they're told to do. They didn't defer every 3 years.
They're now legislated to do it.
They have to. Okay. Yeah. Well, then there you go.
Every 5 years now, Stratas are
they can't defer beyond?
They're not supposed to anymore.
I should probably do my research on this topic before. So that they could defer beyond.
I can't remember the exact date. I want to say it was 2013 depreciation reports started, and they were few and far between. You very rarely saw them. And Stratas were allowed to vote on them at AGMs to defer them if they didn't want to do them or if they were newer buildings. And majority of buildings built in the last 10 years just kept deferring them because even at that time, they cost $8,000 to $10,000 to do, and they cost more now. But now, as of, I want to say 2023, the province of BC legislated Stratas to mandate them to have to produce a depreciation report and redo them every 5 years.
Yeah. And
which is completely unnecessary, by the way.
And again, newer buildings, not as much of a concern.
Yeah.
Even though the depreciation reports for newer buildings aren't that great when you do the math on the unit and how much it's going to cost the unit. If you take these numbers and divide it by the unit entitlement of the property you're buying, in this case, my older condo that has a $380 a month strata fee would have an additional $2,000 to $2,500 monthly contribution to building expenses. It's ridiculous. Yeah. So, but a lot of you're paying an engineering firm to give you a depreciation report document that is outlining the replacement schedule of everything that is on paper when you do the math, massive numbers per unit that people are investing if they follow that schedule. And I think that realtors are aware of this, but buyers that take those reports at face value and don't get a building inspection, you're not going to find a favorable depreciation report for an older building. And in this particular older building that we're selling, it would probably inspect well. Like if a home inspector looked at it, I think it would inspect well. But the depreciation report is a completely different story. So I don't see this legislation going away. I see the positives of pre-planning and building information, genuine. I think the replacement schedule is a little bit unfortunate because engineers are incentivized to cover their butts and have safety factors and not extend things. They have no reason to say a window can last 40 years instead of 30. So it creates, in a lot of cases, an unfavorable document that devalues your property in a way. The alternative to depreciation reports, which was before depreciation reports, they were elective. It would be called it would be an engineering report. It might be a building envelope study. I see there being a lot of value in engineering reports that analyze a building envelope, look at moisture content and readings, and evaluate it that way thoroughly. It's the replacement schedule of replacing things that aren't necessarily broken. And it's unfortunate. My thought for most stratas is defer. Do it when you have to do it. But even when you have to do it, I mean, I don't even know the conversations you can have with engineers, because any engineer you hire, it's probably going to be an unfavorable report.
As a consumer, it's not really your responsibility to understand how to interpret these depreciation reports, but as a realtor working with buyers, it is your responsibility to interpret them for the client. And the practicality of them is just not there, right? So big ticket items are, windows, for example, elevators. Parkade membranes is one that is probably, with windows, probably the most unrealistic, because depreciation reports will put 25 years on parkade membranes. So something that is currently built in the year 2000, 2001, it'll say you need to replace the entire parkade membrane of a building this year or next year or in a couple of years. And to do that entire job might be $5 million. And that might come at a cost of $30,000 or $40,000 per unit. When in practicality, remember that any cost that comes up or any special levy that comes up is going to be voted on by the owners of the building, and 80% have to say yes. If the parkade is not leaking, if the membrane is
75%, right?
75 or 80?
I think it's 3/4 vote.
Maybe 75. 80 is wind
right.
up. Yeah, 80 is wind up. So 75%, sorry. 75% of the owners need to say yes to doing this. And if the parkade, the way that a strata will work is, okay, something is coming towards the end of its lifespan. We're going to have a licensed trade come out and have a look at it and assess it and give us their recommendation. And often in parkade membranes, it's, there's a few minor one-off leak coming into the parkade. You can prolong the life of this membrane 10, 20 years with some highlighted injections in these specific areas to keep water from coming in. But we can push off that project for a number of years. Is the practicality and the likelihood of someone voting in a parkade membrane project that is not leaking or functioning 90% as it should is almost zero. But the depreciation report says it's going to cost each unit $40,000 next year.
Sum up, we're going to take away the thunder from our old episode, but to sum it up, depreciation reports have some benefits. They give you information on the building, but they are drawn up by engineering firms that have a lot of incentives that don't help the homeowner, and they can be scary often for older buildings. And on that note, go have a listen to our episode 40, The Ins and Outs of Depreciation Reports.
Depreciation report. A lot of people have never heard about these things before. They are not a new thing anymore in Greater Vancouver strata properties. 2013 is when they came in.
Do you remember the shock and horror when they came in?
Do you remember? Yeah, how people were freaked out.
Yeah.
You're like, this is a terrible idea.
Stratas were scrambling to get them done. Some were finding out, they didn't have to do them. They just kept on opting out. Yeah. And then the people, when we were selling places, just because of how they're written, buyers, they're not buyer friendly. Yeah. So it jeopardized a lot of deals when it was new, and may still be doing so today.
Well, that's the thing I want to get across today is one, maybe just briefly describe what they are and what they're used for and the benefits of them. But two, from an agent perspective and from a buyer perspective, understanding how to interpret them and explain them to clients, or how to understand them going into a purchase of a strata property. Let's start with, what is a depreciation report? Why? Yeah, what are they?
There's probably a definition that we don't know about, but essentially it's an engineer firm that puts together a formalized report. It's kind of intended to be some sort of standardized report that evaluates older buildings. And I believe it just comes from just a lot of lack of information on some of these older buildings in the past, and buyers buying into them and running into occasionally worst case scenarios that are very expensive. So this is a proactive approach where buildings are responsible to have an engineering firm come in and analyze everything about their building. I think the downside of that is it's probably a good thing for some buildings and not so much for others. And what I mean by that, and there's a lot of instances where buildings that are very old, well, one, the depreciation reports don't look very, very, very good. But when I'm thinking of, say, Coquitlam West or certain parts of Port Moody, there's a lot of these old stratas that are more likely to get bought out from a developer than repair the windows in 25 years and the roof in however many years. So in some instances, the likely resale of certain old buildings and locations is to a developer. And then in some, the more common thing is that the recommended lifespan of a lot of these materials, or the effective age, which is a term that's used in this one in front of me, is a very conservative number. So, do you fix the windows at the effective age of the window, or do you let it ride for next to 10, 20 years until, you need to, until they're starting to leak?
Yeah.
And so I think that's where a lot of the interpretation comes into play, is what is serious, what is not, and understanding that these are, engineers that are covering themselves.
Yeah.
And so they have to be conservative. They have to be, they don't want to have buildings under budget, if anything over budget. But if you budgeted on target with these reports, you would have very expensive strata fees in a lot of cases. And I'm just going to throw this up there and I'm going to say double.
Totally. Yeah. Going back to when depreciation reports were not very popular. And so this came in 2013, where stratas were basically required to produce a depreciation report every 3 years, unless the ownership group, unless the strata council, voted it down. So you actually have to bring it up every year at your AGM after 3 years to vote it down. And even in the first few years, a lot of buildings, stratas were voting them down right away. So a lot of buildings did not have them for first 3, 4, 5 years after 2013. And one big pro is that it gives buyers more information, which I like. Previous to having depreciation reports on a lot of buildings, there was a lot of times where we would be representing buyers in buildings and asking for strata documents. Strata documents are incomplete. It's really just minutes. Council minutes are talking about what current maintenance is happening in the building. It's not discussing what has happened in the past. And so when you're buying in an old building, pre-depreciation report days, you didn't really know things like dates of when the last time the roof was replaced, or if they've done plumbing updates, or any of that kind of information, just because they did not keep very good records. And if that particular seller had only been in the building for a couple of years, they'd have no idea about these dates. So you're asking listing agents questions and their response is, I'm not sure, my seller's only been here for 3 years. So that doesn't really give a buyer a lot of peace of mind going into building, where I think the big pro of depreciation reports is just having a lot of information.
Absolutely. A lot of this stuff was unavailable. Like, even inspectors couldn't get into the electrical room. You wouldn't know what's in there, or the mechanical room.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes a caretaker would have to let you in. And even if they were in, they were probably not the specialist to look at that item.
Yeah.
So, you're...
And you'd hear things like, well, do you have any idea how old the roof is? And the response back would be like, well, it's not the original roof. Okay, well, does that mean like 22 years old? 3 years old? Like, you can, like, for a roof... It's fairly easy to tell from the exterior, just looking at it in terms of how old it is roughly. But like, those are the types of problems that we'd run into previous to depreciation reports.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The con of them, though, on the other side, is that they're long documents. The percentage of people that go through them in detail and understand the way that they're written and understand how to explain them is probably pretty low. So they're not meant to be taken word for word. I think this is important. They are produced by engineer companies that are very conservative in their outlook. So they'll say things like, let's use this roof example. They'll say things in the depreciation report like, asphalt shingle roof, typically these roofs last 20 to 25 years. In 20 years, so like they always pick the low end of that like estimation of how long they're going to last. In 20 years, it's going to cost, let's say, $1 million to replace. And then they put that conservative outlook on a big graph that says like in 2020, you're going to have X number of expenses. 2021, you're going to have X number of expenses. 2022, X number of expenses, all the way for the next 30 years. Again, good to kind of have an idea and to allow, or even shed some light on the typical maintenance projects that should be coming up based on a building's age for the strata. Like a lot of people running strata on strata councils have had very little experience in construction. So it's a good kind of guideline for them to at least be assessing building assets and saying, okay, well, our roof is 17 years old. You know, should we start planning maybe a roof fund so that when we need to replace it in 5, 7, 10 years, whatever that number is, we have a little bit of money set aside rather than, oh shit, the roof is leaking. We need to replace it tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think for large stratas, like real big complexes, these documents are very valuable because those ones are the ones where, you know, there's certain multi-building stratas that need someone to take a thorough look and need it to be a law. Yeah. It's the smaller stratas that struggle to get these reports up to date and opt out of them. And it's the interpretation of the report that causes all the issues.
Totally.
You know, so I think if buyers and realtors on the buying end spoke to the engineer behind these reports or spoke to someone with a construction, like a contractor, someone in construction, they would hear verbally from these people that this is, you know, the conservative, you know, aspect of the report. And if you know, pinpointed items like windows or certain things that are more cosmetic, or, you know, in this case, it's even got gates and railings that get replaced at a certain time. There's certain musts and there's certain, you know, nice to haves. Yeah. And so if you take all these figures as being accurate, and if you expect everyone to fund all these conservative expenses on the recommended schedule, well, I haven't seen a building that's even come close to that.
Not even close.
And even if it did happen, I think across the board, our strata fees would shoot through the roof to come up with it. So the dilemma there is, you know, from a resale standpoint, you like to have low strata fees so you can sell your place, and arguably it's better to do that lump sum assessment every once in a while. From a financial planning perspective, from a homeowner, it's nice to not have those surprise big lump sum, you know, payments every once in a while. So I don't know what the answer is, Denny, but I think if you interpret these with a grain of salt and you don't get too drawn into the facts that aren't gonna, you know, be crucial, I think these are a lot of value. It's just that don't expect them to be renegotiation value, and if you kind of think that this building's going to fall apart based on the results of a conservative depreciation report, and the building's actually okay or average, you might be, you know, walking away from good deals too.
Totally. And that is where we have some big frustrations on the listing agent side, is people taking them word for word or not necessarily understanding them and presenting information to a buyer saying, well, you know, looks like they're going to need to redo their parkade membrane in 3 years. Okay, well, let's assess what that means, right? So a parkade membrane is a huge, huge job. It's depending on the size of this membrane, but let's say a $1.5-2 million job, which is a lot of money. If the parkade is currently not, Jamie, depreciation report says parkade membrane is due in 3 years. It's at the end of its lifespan. We've got to replace the entire thing. You walk around the parkade, you see very little moisture. You see a few small cracks in the concrete. Looks like Strata's maintained it pretty well with the epoxy stuff that they put in to help stop the separation. There's no active water coming in. There's very little staining. Are you assuming that the parkade membrane is going to be done in 3 years?
Likely not, Denny. None of that scenario, no.
So this you like...
We'd be injecting resin into those cracks for the next 20 years before we do that parkade membrane.
And understanding that big jobs like that, they are going to be voted on by the strata. So it's not like, oh, depreciation report says $4 million job next year has to be done. Where's the money coming from? No idea. This is something that is talked about likely quite a bit with the strata council, with the owners of the strata. This is something where they likely get a few different quotes from different contractors and different assessments. So some person might come in and say, this parkade membrane has another 10 years left on it. There's a couple spot fixes that we can do that are going to cost $15,000 instead of $1.5 million that are going to prolong the life of this membrane. Here's a few different options. And then the strata council is going to discuss it and vote on it. Just because it's in the depreciation report doesn't mean that that's the exact number that is coming out.
I think the parkade membrane is a good example of a monstrous bill that can be an absolute deal breaker for people. And it's one of those items that can also be a spot repair.
Yeah.
It can apply to a whole systematic, it could be the whole carport, which occasionally happens. And I think there was a building in New West, I think I drove by the other day that was going through that. And yeah, like Denny said, these are over $1 million projects. I had the fortunate benefit earlier in my career to represent 3 engineers that do depreciation reports, that work for firms that study these buildings and put these reports together. And I guess just to do the real Coles notes of what they were looking at, they were looking at the exterior envelopes of the buildings. That was their main focus, is the design and the envelope. What is it made of and what is the design? And for example, if you have a big exposed, if you have a high rise that's not rain screened and it's say not a concrete exterior, maybe it's like a stucco like material, and there's hairline cracks underneath the windows and there's no overhang protecting them and there's no rain screen. If you see the cracks under the windows and you see that it's a 90s built exterior, there could be a likelihood in that particular kind of case that it's not a safe building or needs an envelope upgrade. But envelope was the number one thing for them, and parkade is up there as well. There's a lot of detail in these depreciation reports about boilers and gates and elevators, and those are expensive if you are solely responsible to pay for them, but as a percentage they're much less.
Yeah.
So if we want to just kind of highlight the real big takeaways of the big ticket items, I think parkade would be on that list, and exterior envelope. And exterior envelope goes for, usually it's the exterior material that triggers that, but when they do that, they often do the windows and the balconies and everything else with it.
Yeah.
If it is a rain screen, for example.
It's important. So like one of the things I'm trying to get across is how do we present this to, as a realtor, how do you present this to a buyer who maybe has never seen a depreciation report before and is not super educated on construction? I think it's important, one, to explain that depreciation reports are conservative in nature. They are a 30-year outlook of a building, and the likelihood of something being done on the exact date is pretty low. So explaining like what typically happens in terms of a strata. They're going to start assessing this particular asset, parkade membrane, whatever it is. They are going to contact a few different contractors to have them come in and assess what should be done, needs to be done. Do they need to do the whole thing? Has it failed that poorly? Or is there spot fixes that can be done to prolong the life for another 10 years? And then let's say worst case scenario. So these are all the things that I'm going through when talking to a buyer. Last thing I talk about is if parkade membrane is done in 3 years from now. Let's say the entire thing's failed. It's a full-on waterfall in the parkade. Cars are soaked. You get a free car wash every day, but that's fine. Then you break it down, right? Break down the cost. Yeah. So let's say they're estimating it to be $1.5 million. There's 250 units in the strata, whatever it is. Here's your unit entitlement for this specific building or for this specific unit. Here is what the potential cost could be if they vote to levy this 100% versus take some money from contingency or whatever. And when you break it, so I'm talking about parkade membranes because I had an experience last week with one that was outrageous. Let's just leave it at that.
Still sore sport?
A little bit. When we lose good deals, it really, it's frustrating. When I broke down that unit entitlement for that specific unit, the worst case scenario was a $4,500 bill, which is not fun for anyone. But when a buyer sees $1.5 million, they think, oh, geez, that's a lot of money. How am I going to come up with $1.5 million? Well, guess what? You're not paying for the whole thing. And the unit entitlement for that unit was $4,500. So
And that's for a worst case of a parking scenario for this particular
That was
example?
worst case for a parkade membrane that they had, I think, in like 2027 or something like that.
That's a tough one, parkade, because it doesn't really add value from a resale point of view. You know, the buyer just expects it to work.
Yeah.
And if you rain screen the building, I'd like to think that you at least get half of that expense back in increased value, because the building is rain screen. You can see it. It's buyers appreciate it.
Yeah.
But in your case, $1.5 million bill translates to $4,500, translates to a collapsed deal.
Yeah.
And you're the agent, so you're the biased messenger that can't be trusted. So how, at the same time, I think we can't control our agency relationship, but what we would say is just it's all about how you communicate it. And if unit entitlement's always a helpful tool for us realtors, because these numbers are huge, and breaking it down to your unit is also important as well. But first-time buyers hearing $4,500 as a potential worst-case scenario 3 years out. That is a lot of money, but it's not. And, I would say first-time buyers get used to those. I mean, if you're looking at a building that has that coming up, you're looking at an older building and you're getting more space for less price because of it. Yeah. So just that's a small percentage. If that is in combination with a poorly designed building that has rain screen issues or questions, that's another thing. Yeah. But if it's ticking all the boxes and there's a worst case scenario of $4,500 in 3 years, and that's the assumption there is that's like 1% of the purchase price. That's not that's a risk I would take on.
Mm-hmm. And obviously you guys can sense a little bit of frustration in my voice describing this stuff. But I guess I would like to provide a solution. I don't expect every single realtor out there to be a construction knowledge expert and to be able to navigate through the difficult 120-page reports that are depreciation reports. But don't present something to a client unless you actually know what it is that you're explaining. If you do not understand strata, let's say you're newer in the business, you've only seen a handful of depreciation reports, and this is not your expertise yet. Ask questions. Like, call someone in your office that has been in the business for 20 years that does a lot of strata. Ask them what, window replacement. That it says window replacement in 3 years. Does that mean all the windows in the building are going to be redone at the exact same time in 3 years from now? No, I've never seen one strata do that. Have you ever seen a strata do all the windows? No. Windows, like, a lot of things are kind of a case by case basis.
Unless it's a full rain screen, maybe.
Yeah, maybe a few rare cases, but a lot of things are case by case basis. So when things come towards the end of their typical lifespan, like a window, like even like balconies, Stratas will assess the whole complex and say, okay, well, there's 3 balconies that have some real bad soft spots. We should get those done next year. And then there's a few more that have a few years left, so we're going to talk about them next year. But it like in rare cases we're redoing every window in the building for $5.5 million.
No, it's usually piecemeal. Like, that's like the balcony example you gave. That's very common. They do a few balconies at a time. And so, from a strata perspective, just once you get these depreciation reports done, if you do have a plan of action from that report that highlights the important items, get it in your minutes right after, so that it isolates the items from a strata perspective that are important, because that might be very helpful for future buyers. Yeah. Although I don't think stratas are worried about buyers when they're doing their meetings. So we'll see how far that goes.
But they probably should be. They should at least take it into consideration in terms of how they present information, right?
It would be helpful for depreciation report comes in. That's a big document. It would be helpful for some sort of summary of that document into a plan. Not use the plan on the report. Yeah. The Strata's version of that plan after. But, every building's different and there's a lot of politics and people involved. And I don't know what the answer there is, Denny, but I do think the overall positive from these reports probably outweigh the negatives as a whole. Yeah. But yeah, the negatives are frustrating experiences.
When we're on the other side, when we're on the buyer side, it's extremely helpful to have these reports, especially when you're looking at older buildings, just to give you specific dates. Like I said earlier, when I started in 2014, 2015, very few buildings had depreciation reports. And so when you're helping buyers going into older buildings, 1960s, 70s, 80s buildings, there's a lot of question marks. Saying, well, have they redone the plumbing? Like, I don't know. I asked the listing agent. I've asked the last 3 buyers agents who've bought in this building. There's nothing in the minutes. There's no report like a depreciation report telling us how old the plumbing is, how old the whatever boilers are. I don't know. There's going to be question marks. Whereas this type of report is awesome for just like giving us all this information and helping Stratas keep record of this information.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up, Denny. Yeah. Right. And I will say, just to add to that, there's certain parts of this town, like Kitsilano, where some of the buildings are absolutely falling apart, and gutter systems keeping water off cars and depreciation reports would be terrible. Yeah. But there's still desirable places to live. And so recognize when you are buying in a place, really look at how much is the land worth in this place, because sometimes the land is worth more than the structure, or at least at par with it. Yeah. Anyway, no, this was good.
We've got one of those right now. We got to burn. This is the last little.
We'll close out the Depreciation Report podcast. Thanks for listening, everyone.